Today on Diksha, we are going to take a look at punishment. It seems to be a common topic today where we question whether people, or children especially, need to be punished and what form of punishment, or what is, let's say, the limit of what is considered appropriate punishment of children. And the reason this has come up recently is because there is an apparent indiscipline, especially among young children and teenagers, and this seems to be spilling into early adulthood and even full adults, where people are indisciplined. People do not know how to control themselves. So there's a greater call being made for punishment of children when they have done wrong. Now, firstly, I think it's important to ask ourselves, well, why should children, or why should people be punished when something is done wrong? And the answer is fairly obvious, that there needs to be some kind of repercussion for an action. And although we think in terms of only punishment, it also applies to rewarding somebody. So positive reinforcement in rewarding people when they have done something right, and let's say negative reinforcement or a negative action when someone has done something wrong. And this way, young children and young adults and full-grown adults learn what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Now, when we begin thinking like this, then the question comes to mind, well, what is acceptable and what is right? Because that's not something so easy to define, especially in a multicultural society and a multi-religious society as well, where there are a lot of cultural, social, and religious norms present every day in the public as well as in private situations that are acceptable. And there are a lot of cultural and social and religious practices that are acceptable to a particular group or to a particular cultural group. So then the question is, well, what is an appropriate form of punishment based on which criteria? Are we basing what is appropriate based on cultural group or on religious group or both? Or are we amalgamating all our beliefs into one common, let's say, Trinidadian culture, where we say that this is a norm across the board? And that's not so easy to figure out. Now, one of the most common facets that we can look at is corporal punishments dealt to children and to teenagers in school or at home. And the major question I have is, well, what are we trying to achieve when we punish our children? What is the objective? Is the objective that we don't want the child to, let's say, repeat an act or to repeat a failure? Because then we have to look at, well, what is the point of the child not repeating the failure and not repeating that act? Is it that the parent at the time, or the person at the time, doesn't particularly like that particular act or failure? Or is it that the child needs to understand that that is not appropriate for social interaction and social conduct? Because this, I think, is the major dividing point when it comes to what is appropriate, or how should children be punished, or how should adults be punished for that matter. Because there has to be a goal to the punishment. It can't just be a blind, let's say especially with children, corporal punishment, that is the go-to method to punish a child. Because I don't think in the first place corporal punishment does anything in terms of teaching a child anything. If anything, it teaches a young child especially to solve problems with violence, which is what children do. It's that basically who is bigger and who is stronger and who can deal punishment to people who are weaker and who are less aggressive. That's basically all you're teaching with corporal punishment. If we are looking at a school scenario where the teacher uses corporal punishment on children, or a parent uses corporal punishment on a child, all that really teaches the child on a fundamental level is that I am bigger than you, or I am in a position of power, and so I can hurt you. And most likely the child will just get from this that people in positions of power have the ability to hurt you. If you don't want to be hurt, get into a position of power or become stronger. And that's basically the only message from corporal punishment. Now, I'm not saying that, I'm not coming out to say don't hit children, because that's really not my place to tell people if they hit their children or not. What I am saying is that when somebody is punished, it should be with a goal in mind. So if my goal, let's say, I want my child to do better in school, and some parents they beat their children when they are not learning. And some parents, they beat their children when the child is not learning or performing well in school or is studying or doing their homework. Even in school, when you get answers wrong, when I was in primary school, you got answers wrong or you didn't do your homework, you got licks, you were beaten. And it never really taught us the importance of homework or the importance of getting answers right. What it really was that we knew that we had to get it right so to avoid pain. That was it. So it worked, but not necessarily from the point of teaching. It worked by creating fear. And the reason I make this distinction is, what if we ask ourselves through the education process, so we are educating a child, what are you teaching the child when you apply corporal punishment? And if you can't come up with a clear, definite answer, then probably you shouldn't be using it. And the reason I say this is because, let's say a child does something wrong, which, let's say, stealing. So a child does something, they steal something, and you beat the child. You haven't really taught the child that stealing is wrong. I mean, you could take away, the child could take away from this, don't get caught. And that's it. Because if you get caught, you get licks. So the child might just, if it's a clever child, might come up with different ways to steal and not get caught. And then all you're really doing is reinforcing the idea in the child to be clever enough that when you steal, you do not get caught. Otherwise, you face painful circumstances. So nowhere in this scenario you taught the child that stealing is wrong. And the same can be said with all lessons that you try to teach the child and use corporal punishment as the way to punish that child. There's no passing on of any particular kind of knowledge to this young individual to prepare them to be a constructive adult in society. All it does is reinforce a pain aversion in the person, where, okay, they might not steal again, using stealing as the example, they might not steal again only based on the fact that it is painful to get caught. physically painful. Now let's say later on in life this child becomes big and they reach in a position of power, physically big I mean, and they reach in a position of power where physical pain is no longer a threat. Well, what's to stop the child from stealing? Because all they learned was that if I get caught, it's physically painful for me. So now I'm in a position where, well, because of my physical size, there are very few people around me that could cause me physical pain if I get caught stealing. And the second thing is, if I'm in a position of power, which is what the adult represents, then my position of power protects me from feeling any kind of pain from being caught stealing. And that's beside the fact of being intelligent enough to learn how to get away with stealing. But the whole point of the conversation is beating a child does not teach a child. It only reinforces the idea of averting pain. It's the same thing with, let's say, if you're thinking about a child who does not study, or a child that lies, or a child that doesn't listen to parents. Any of the reasons that you beat children for, or adults, any of the reasons that you punish adults for, you have to look at the outcome of the lesson that you want to teach the person. And base, let's say, an exercise on that, on the desired outcome, and put forth that exercise in an effort to teach the person. And teach does not mean, classroom setting, stuff like that. In a previous episode, we talked about education being something that happens. In a previous episode, we talked about education being an ongoing process. It's not a commodity. It's not a noun. So being that education is something that's ongoing, it is possible through leisure activities. It is possible through relationships, one-on-one relationships or group relationships with people to learn. So the values and the ideas and the traditions which our culture has that will shape an individual into an honest, hardworking and dependable individual, these are the things which will teach the person a value, not punishment. Punishment is basically a dead-end street, because unless this person really understands the lesson being taught through that physical punishment, they won't, because it's not as though the child has the same level of intelligence as an adult to say, okay, I am being beaten for this reason, knowing fully well that the adult is probably beating them for another reason. And the same can be said for adults in the justice system who have committed crimes and who are being punished, not corporal punishment, but being punished by imprisonment. That, well, what is the lesson that's being learned? What is the value structure that's being passed on to the individual? Is the individual really reflecting and learning from the experience of being caught and imprisoned? Or is the individual really learning not to be caught and looking at ways to devise not to be caught or not to be convicted? Because any intelligent person who doesn't see the value in not committing a crime, but rather sees the value in not being caught committing a crime, well, they already know how to commit a crime, so it's easier for them to learn how not to be caught rather than to forget that value of crime. And I think if we analyze it a little bit, it's the it's the nature of a person to take the easiest route. So it's the nature of an adult to beat a child because the child is defenseless, and it's harder to come up with a lesson or a teaching to guide a young individual. Because that takes, well, first of all, it takes some introspection in yourself to know if you are capable of teaching a young child. I mean, a lot of us are capable of having children, but what about teaching a child and guiding a child into the principles of social etiquette and the principles of what is conducive to their individual growth and development? Is an adult capable of doing that? Well, that's why we have the education system, because we realize, okay, well, to teach academics and to teach some of the moral values, that one person is not enough. But do we really realize that? And hence why I think we resort to, well, violence as the solution, because it's a really base value. It's the easiest thing to utilize. But I think it has little value as a teaching tool. If anything, it's counterproductive to teaching. So this is my thought process concerning punishment, and especially corporal punishment, that it's fundamentally unproductive, and I will say retroactive, to use violence as a teaching tool, to use threats as a teaching tool, or to use imprisonment or restricting somebody as a teaching tool. It is better. It's a little bit more complex, but it's better to teach principles and values and morals than to try to use violence as a teaching tool. So this is my simple thought on corporal punishment, but punishment on the whole. So one key thing to note is that punishment, I think, should directly relate to the lesson or the moral that you want the individual to learn, or that you as the guiding or the teacher or the custodian of this person at that point in time, the end value that you want this person to leave with. So if I want this person to be more responsible, that the punishment should be geared at making a person more responsible, whether it's an activity or whether it's a task or restricting. But it can be abstract. Like corporal punishment, for example, is abstract from getting a child to learn or perform better in school. It doesn't really solve the problem. And in that way, we can say that the remedy to something does not have to be a punishment. It's merely recognizing a fault or recognizing something happening that is negative or detrimental, and putting things into motion that will have a positive result or a positive outcome on the individual that you are wishing to correct. So simply put, what I'm saying is, let's say, for example, corporal punishment or arresting an adult might be considered wrong if at the end the person does not learn a relevant lesson. It is better to put corrective measures in place that directly relate to what is wrong, what is happening that is wrong, so that that is corrected, and in the end the person is better off or elevated. I think this one shift in awareness with the approach to punishment or the approach to correcting an individual would have major positive results compared to the standard punishment that we are accustomed with. Now, and obviously one of the main factors or the main points to consider in this is the magnitude of what you are correcting. Obviously, if it's something illegal or if it's something that you as an individual cannot handle, that's where people can consult authoritative figures, whether it's for a crime, the police, or if it's educational, you consult the educational institutes and those kind of things. So it's not a one-man show to say there are no options or there's no help that you can get. So this is my simple thought process in terms of punishment and the lines to correcting unwanted behavior or negative behavior in an individual. And probably sometimes, physical punishment may prove beneficial, but I don't think it's the solution for everything. And this is my short presentation today on Diksha, on punishment. And I hope this opens up a couple avenues of thought in looking at things differently, based on what we want to guide an individual to learn and to become. So my name is Omkar, thanking you for joining me on Diksha today, and I'll see you next time.